Okay, are there any citizens' comments that has nothing to do with what we're here to discuss tonight? Outside of what we're going to discuss? Okay. We'll wait till Eric gets back.
Jumped up, Linda.
Hmm?
Oh, here he comes. So we're here to hear from you. Can I just start?
Yeah.
And, because of there's a lot of people online here as well. So what we'd like to do is we're going to have one person from the audience speak, and then we'll probably have one person on Zoom speak. If you're here, have to come to the podium so that everyone on Zoom can hear, and please state your name. We would like to bring the comments in 2 minutes just because there's a lot of you here. We have time, and we'll certainly open it up to more. And on Zoom, if you would also state your name, that would be helpful.
And mute yourself if you're not speaking on Zoom.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, if you're not on Zoom, please make sure you have your mute button on.
Okay.
Or if you are on Zoom.
So we're going to go right to citizens' comments.
Well, that's what we're here.
Yeah. Okay, so anyone want to come up and have something to say?
So I'm Tom Weschler, Woodstock. Help me understand if the Vondell Reservoir is required for the functioning of the current water system and the water system after the capital improvement.
So at present, it is not. The Vondell Reservoir was constructed, I believe, in the 60s. And the main reason was a concern for drought and having that watershed, which is a pretty phenomenal resource, available in that case. I think we feel, at least I personally feel, that we're not out of that danger. And it's a very valuable piece of real estate for the town to have for the future. One of the problems Woodstock's had is we don't look to the future as often as we should. And that's why we're advocating for the purchase of Vondell. It's not used presently, but it could be in the future.
But doesn't, with the purchase or the intended purchase and closing of the aqueduct property, doesn't the town already have an easement and access to the water?
There are easements. We're not, you can probably address, Eric, whether that's.
Yeah, just to be clear, we haven't bought the water company yet.
No, I understand.
So the select board got approval to purchase it, and we're going through that process right now.
Understood.
In a purchase, there are easements to the Vondell property to get to the water rights that we would need and the equipment that's currently there already.
So why would we need to purchase if we have easements to the water?
I think Susan just answered that question.
And
I'll expand further on that, Tom. We separated these articles, one for the Vondell, the rest for the infrastructure, because the Vondell serves more than just the purpose of water. We could use that water in the future if needed, and Eric is looking into whether or not that easement covers future infrastructure to use that reservoir for domestic water, because it needs filtration. But I think beyond that, again, to reiterate Susan's point, we are looking at this land as an investment, and it's up to the citizens to decide whether or not this is a worthwhile investment, including, but not limited to, like the future water use. Some other purposes that we've heard from the community are as a investment in our recreation, the recreation value that it has between hiking, mountain biking, and also possibly as conservation, but also just to diversify, I think, in some of our holdings.
One final question. I get the fact that Wamba is awesome. I get the fact the property is awesome. I understand all of that. you as a select board chose 2 years ago not to accept a gift of a property on Mountain Avenue for recreation. And that property came with an endowment of $800,000. And so I'm trying to understand how to make sense of the purchase of a property when we didn't accept a gift.
But if
I'll
I asked-
answer that because I was the
Okay.
lead about not purchasing it.
Okay.
At that time, $800,000 was supposed to finance maintenance and upkeep of the park. I'm sorry. At that time, Faulkner Park, they said we would get $40,000 a year for maintenance, for upgrades, and so forth for Faulkner Park. There's a shack on that building that has asbestos in it. That would probably have wiped out half that $800,000. That didn't make sense. Now we have $400,000 that would not pay for any would not pay for a part-time person that was there already maintaining the park. That's the difference.
And I would also add, the difference is that that's still a park. You know, it's still being preserved for its initial use. If we don't buy Vondell, we do risk that it fell to a private owner and a lot of the present recreation use, and potentially our ability to use it as a water source in the future is lost. We're
No, you
giving-
don't, no, you've indicated,
No,
We gotta give
I was-
somebody else a
and
chance.
I
okay,
finish my sentence. Our easements are for existing things. We don't know in 20 years from now if a drought hits and we need to use Vondell, if those easements are going to be what's sufficient to run that as a water source. So I think the easements could be limiting to our future use. And
I'll just add, I don't think a potential mistake 2 years ago should the board makes a mistake now. So
sorry, sir.
that a possible mistake 2 years ago by not acquiring Faulkner Park should not make sure the select board makes another mistake now and not acquire the Vondell.
Anyone online?
if you're on Zoom and want to talk, if you put your little electronic hand up, that would be helpful.
Somebody has their hand up. Rebecca. Oh,
Oh.
never mind.
No one online yet.
Anyone else?
Thanks, Barbara.
Barbara Kennedy in Woodstock. Is the
A
Vondell,
little bit louder so they could get it on the microphone.
Barbara Kennedy, Woodstock.
Thank
Is the Vondell property currently taxable?
Yes.
And what is the revenue from that every year?
This past year is $13,000.
Thank you.
And just for some kind of clearance, we pay about $15,000 a year to get the water readings from the water company to do our sewer billing.
Nobody online. Any other?
Good evening. My name is Byron Kelly. First of all, I want to thank the select board. You went through a horrific fall and with this vote. And I know from personal experience how the traveling show works and how hard it is on everyone and all of your schedule. But going into the next vote, one of my questions was already answered. The Vondell and the 1B are separate on the vote. Thank you very much for that. As I've stated in the past, and I'll state again, I believe the 1B is warranted. I believe the 1B should pass. I also personally don't mind that being absorbed by the town as a whole and not just to the users. Some people may disagree, some people may agree with that. A concern that I have that came up that I just want to point out, because I'm probably wrong, is under Title 24, Section 1822, B5. it talks about how indebtedness for public utilities should be borne by the users. I'm still not opposed to the 1B part. I just wanted to say that I did find that within statute, and I think it's worth at least looking at. So that was my concern on that. On the Vondell property,
Byron, can I
Here-
just answer that question quickly? So we're working with an attorney, a law firm, and the Vermont Bond Bank on all these legal issues, and they're so far okay with everything we're doing.
okay. Just pointing that.
Yeah, for the record, I want to.
Anyone can look at. On the Vondell property, I am not convinced yet. Personally, and I think that's gonna be a hard sell for many. Vondell is not a capital expenditure. It wasn't included in the capital expenditure portion. It wasn't included anywhere in any of the reports that I read. It's a want. And it may be a good want, but there's also other things that were included. For instance, a diversification from one site to two on the east end. And so if you do 1.6 million for that property, and you're not even talking about upgrades for that, is that money well spent if we want to, if the plan is sometime to upgrade for the east end? Just my input on that. And that's all that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to answer the Vondell again, or?
Suzie Stoll, Woodstock Village, am I speaking out of turn or somebody else?
No.
Okay, so, $1.6 million, that's for how many acres of land?
358.
350 acres of land, that just seems like a pretty good price. When we took the, tour on, Saturday, there was a lot of talk about the community that lived there for a very long time and, from 1790s on, so it has a lot of historical relevance to, is that a fair statement that Vondell has a lot of, and then, one of the maps, said that there's a lot of riparian ecosystem, a lot of rare plants, presumably, native birds, native insects, native plants. Is that true? So we could say that is ecologically relevant as well?
Salamanders that are particularly endangered.
And so we're in a drought right now. I got a Vermont alert saying forest fires. We got a red flag alert going on right now. So there's drought, there's forest fires in New York City right now. 2022, we had a historical drought. So can that sometime in the future, we've got accelerating climate change. Can the Vondell be used for fighting wildfires in the future? Is that like an insurance that we have? Is that a yes or a no, or?
I think that it's certainly a
Any water body.
water source body.
So it could be an emergency as we're experiencing climate change and we're dealing with more droughts and wildfires like we are right now. My final question is I heard, I don't know if this is true, I heard that that 350 acres includes two 20-acre parcels that could either be sold off if we needed money in the future, or we could use it for building more houses, which would increase our tax base and stuff like that. Is that true, or is that a rumor?
I think that we certainly would have as an intention in the future to keep that in mind. I don't think that there's been any survey work or any site work to say that there's definitively two 20-acre parcels, but there probably are some, there is some room for development up there. Right?
So if we get this thing, 350 acres for $1.6 million, which divided by a lot of people over a 40-year or 30-year term is not a lot of money, but we get future water in case of emergency, future firefighting in case of emergency, future investments to sell off in case we need the money. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason that we quickly went into executive session is we did receive an appraisal of Vondell, and we wanted to discuss whether or not we would, because it's confidential, whether we would make the amount public. So and we decided we would. So for the 357.96 acres, it's appraised at $2,058,000.
So we're getting a $400,000 deal on it.
And I want to highlight something Susie said, which is, I think that this land represents a lot of options, and the board, correct me if I'm wrong, is again looking at this as something for the town to decide, both in the present and ongoing and in the future, what it wants to do with this land. It doesn't have to be, you know, I don't expect to decide probably in the next 5 years that this is something we're gonna say like, okay, let's cut out a piece and let's develop it. There's lots that would go into it. The land is under an Act 50 permit. There's, you know, there's many things. But I think the opportunity is what we're trying to present to voters.
It's an insurance in case we need it.
Hi, I'm Molly Hutchins. I live in Woodstock. I actually live on Dana Road, which is off of Cox District Road. I attended with Susan last Saturday, our walk up to the Vondell. I walk up there probably 5 days a week. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot. However, that water is not connected in any way with the big blue tank down below on Cox District. So thoughts of next summer, if we have a fire downtown, that there might be a wrench that would open something and let that water down through. That is not true. Tubes and pipes and things like that would have to be put in order for that. But as Susie said, it's an insurance and it's beautiful. And you should go with Susan next Saturday if you haven't been there. Thank you.
I'm going Saturday at 1. Again, we won't have the mats or a bus, but if anyone wants to walk with me, please come.
There's a question online, Alex Molly.
Alex Mully was a member of the water working group. I don't think I have a full picture on the sort of funding plan. I was curious how the allocation of local option and hospitality taxes fit into that picture. It seems out of what I've heard or seen that 135K annually, that's 60% or so of the annual debt service on a $5 billion bond. So I'm having a hard time understanding how that all falls onto property taxes.
Sure. Do you have the worksheet?
Yeah, what do you want to show on the worksheet though? 'Cause we have
The most, the most recent allocation. So Alex, to answer your question, I believe we've tentatively allocated 20% of the meals, alcohol, and rooms tax, roughly 20%, but we are going with a hard number because that number fluctuates, of $70,000 per year. $75,000 per year. And then $60,000 from the new local sales options tax. So to your point, that's $135,000 annually towards the debt service.
Right, but towards what debt service? Because on the 5 million, that's at say 2.5%, 30 years. Like that's probably 240K, right? It's like 60%. I'm asking these questions because it seems like 80% of this entire capital outlay is on the taxpayer account and 20% is on the user account. That seems disproportionate. In comparing the current, at least what I can tell as the current situation, if you were to compare that to the rate case last spring with the PUC, like the relative benefits of municipal ownership, like 80% of it appears to accrue to the users and 20% would accrue to the town. It just seems really out of sorts. And so I'm trying to sort out where these dollars would be. Like what are they funding? What debt service are they funding?
Yeah, right now we have them serving the entirety of the, Eric, can you scroll up? the entirety of all 4 bonds.
Oh, just two.
Oh, just 2, just the bond, is that what we discussed? Just 2 or all 4?
Are you talking about shared by all parcels?
I'm talking about the EDC contributions and the local options tax contributions.
Oh, that would be,
Right now in this spreadsheet, those are just going to the Vondell and Elm Street.
Okay,
I'd have to
so-
do a different shell to,
You mean Vondell and option 1B? Yes. To your point about them funding, I mean, I think that the way that we've set up the local options tax, the most recent local options tax was earmarked for infrastructure specifically, keeping in mind we knew we had projects like this and the upcoming sewer bond, as well as other infrastructure projects, not uncommon for many communities in Vermont. And the same with the Economic Development and Community Fund. The board felt that this was appropriate allocation for that. Are you suggesting something else as
Well,
a?
let me just interrupt for a minute.
Yeah.
The users are also taxpayers. So it's not just non-users paying for that, it's users also. So that's,
I understand that. Is it possible that this sheet or a form of it could be included in minutes or shared? It's just this seems like a massive subsidization exercise of homeowners insurance policies, of spa treatments at the resort. This is all coming to, it's substantial, really disproportionate to the taxpayer as far as I can tell, and I have a lot of concerns about that.
All right, if you have a suggestion, I mean, that's why we're having the meeting, so.
none of the allocation has not been voted on. It's a proposal, so that's why we're having this meeting tonight.
John Spector, Woodstock. On this same issue about how the bonds will be paid for, I have a process question, and I guess a suggestion. But first, let me ask the question. Since I missed the meeting on the 8th, but I read the minutes, and it looks like this allocation and payment thing is not part of the warning, right? It's a decision on the part of the select board that you've discussed but haven't voted on. And so what does that mean, that if you did vote on it, and let's say you voted on this specific allocation or some different one, and then over the course of the next 2 years, not 10 years, but 2 years, as you get more, as you think about funding of the new priorities that you've set, housing and climate resiliency and so forth, that you discover that those really require significant funding, which I think is what you'll discover, particularly with respect to housing and maybe climate resiliency. Is it technically possible for you to change that formula, since it's, or is that something that is, leave aside if it's politically difficult, but is it, like if the voters had voted on that 75,000 and 60,000 something, presumably you couldn't change that without another vote, but it's a select board decision. Would you be allowed to change that if you decided that the priorities were different or something? Like you could increase the Economic Development Reserve Fund amount, or you could decrease it, or you could leave it the same?
Yeah, in theory, it also depends on how we set up the language. If the language for this bond will be in an ordinance or a vote by the select board, that'll play a part as well.
Oh, so the warning, sorry, the warning doesn't say that, it just says we want to do it.
And what it asks is the residents to bond up to amount of money to do the capital projects.
But not how we would pay for it.
Exactly.
Right, so therefore so I think the answer to my question is yes, you would have the ability to change that formula after you vote on it, whatever it is, and maybe Alex makes a suggestion, or it stays the way it is. You vote on it soon.
Yeah.
And then
So where we got that $3 million grant and we don't need
right. Yeah. Okay. So then my suggestion would be that you position I think that you are going to face a lot of competing funding requirements, whether they involve the Economic Development Reserve Fund or not. There's just a lot of capital expenditure. So my suggestion is that the way you communicate, whatever it is, whatever your funding proposal for this is, and for what it's worth, although, as I've said this to you before, while I don't completely agree with the allocation and so forth, I understand the need for it, and I think I think I described it as a good, not a perfect, but a good approach to funding it. I still feel that way. So I'm not complaining.
The allocation, not the.
I'm talking about the EDC allocation, right? I mean, I understand the situation. I don't completely agree with it, but I understand it. And you know, you had your decisions. That's fine. But I just think that you should try to preserve flexibility in the minds of the voters, so that since they're not voting on it, so that 2 or 3 years from now, if you need to change it because things change or you decide that it's needed for some other projects and so forth, that you feel like you have the space to do that. Because this is the first of a series of things, and there's only a limited amount of money. So I just encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone online?
I can just address a little bit of what John said. I think, you know, the difficulty for me is I want the voters going on December 10th, knowing what their possible cost could be. And, you know, our goal is that we will be voting on this and the allocation between user and non-user. Because we certainly don't want people going to the polls not knowing that answer. So.
When you say we will be voting, you mean we, the select board, will be voting?
Select board,
Right.
yes, yes.
No, I understand that.
And, you know, as far as I am, personally, I wouldn't in 2 years say, oops, changed our mind. Now your rate's going up. You know, and I may not be on the select board in 2 years, so it might not be an issue,
Right.
but that's kind of the way I feel, is that if we're making that commitment, financial commitment to the voters, it would be very hard to back away from.
I completely understand that. My suggestion then is that you do as much thinking as possible between now and December 10th as to what the capital requirements are going to be for things like housing and climate resiliency, which are 2 of the 4 priorities that you talked about, and that you make the decision about funding this with some sense of what those other priorities that you set need, because as soon as this vote is over and the priorities become a main discussion point, my understanding is you haven't allocated any funds or very little funds to those priorities. And so I think.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see anyone online still.
Is there an attendance sheet?
I think
My name's Roger Logan, Woodstock. I just want to say I came to this process very much a skeptic of whether we should purchase the Vondell property, irrespective of whatever was needed to operate the water system. Over time, I've discussed this with many people and got the opportunity to take the walk last week on a beautiful piece of property. And I have to say that I think this is an instance in which our government is being forward thinking in looking to ensure, or not ensure, but to prepare for potential possibilities in the future. Operationally, obviously, the most critical being having an additional water source that obviously it would need some infrastructure work done to make that something that could go straight into the water system as it is today, but it's something that we can't do if we don't own it. And I also think, I think that Woodstock needs to grow if we're not going to keep increasing our taxes and increasing our taxes for less and less government, because the prices are just going to keep going up. And if it's the same static amount of people paying for everything that this town needs to do and the school district needs to do, then we will never be able to do anything again, and we're going to start on a serious decline. So we have to take steps to prepare for the future. I'm also very intrigued, and I don't know about the zoning, and I don't know about the slope laws and riparian things of that nature, but my guess is there is some developable property on that that either Woodstock could partner with somebody who's going to do affordable housing of some kind or the other rental or potentially ownership. We can't do that if we don't own it. We don't know how to do it right now, but if we don't own this property, we can't take advantage of that in the future. So we need to keep moving forward. And if we don't move forward, we're moving backwards. Thank you.
No one on.
Go ahead.
Hi all, Stephen Bauer, village resident. So I wanted to start by maybe doing something that might help the select board a little bit, and this is this 491 page study that has been relied on both by you guys, by Woodstock Aqueduct Company before this started, and also by the Water Working Group. Multiple times it reminds us through there that the goals of the study and the goals of Article 2 that you're proposing and the 1B, which is the choice that you made, is to improve fire flows and eliminate hydraulically deficient hydrants. That is the focus. There's nothing about replacing anything right now in the capital plan that Article 2 presents, anything in the village or anything for growth. So I think that might help a little bit with answering that breakdown question that people are going to continue to have. I'll start with the Vondell property. And so there's some things, Roger pointed to it. I've been an advocate, continue to be an advocate for affordable housing. There is a possibility that you don't own property as the town and you still get affordable housing out of it. There's public-private partnerships that can always happen. I just want to point that out. 335 acres are in current use. Assuming that if the town purchases that, assuming we adopt the current forest management plan, what's the income? I haven't seen what is the income that could be generated from that forestry management plan. That could be another way to get the revenue. As for natural resources, so that means that there's 22 acres that is excluded. Out of that, just going A&R Atlas very quick, I mean, we're valuing maybe 5 to 10 acres, if I'm being very liberal, of an asset that is potentially a developable area. The rest of it is not economically feasible and would not be able to be sold, let alone our zoning wouldn't allow for most of it and wouldn't allow that to be a valuable asset. Me personally, I bike out there all the time, and I value that at $1.6 million. But I also sympathize and understand the question mark of where we're getting that valuation. Susan, you had pointed out that the current or the brand new evaluation at $2.58 million.
2.058.
Sorry, 2.058. That was my mistake. And then we have it currently listed. I mean, the lister evaluation is somewhere around $1.1 million. So not only, Eric, you had mentioned about $13,000 that we're getting. Obviously, a lot of that is in current use, so that's significantly down, but that's almost a double amount. Not a huge amount, but it's just adds to not only the bond that we have to pay, but thinking about you also have to make up that difference somewhere, because the state's going to continue to ask for its education fund. Really, my biggest thing that I want to ask and probably will continue to ask is just asking the taxpayers for something that absolutely I feel like needs to happen. And I think a lot of people are on board with that. It's just, where is the plan to get the return on investment? Again, I value Vondell property because of the things that I like to do at $1.6 million. I'm fine with it. The 6.7, the plan 1B is not what was recommended by the engineers. The engineers recommended 1B plus 2, which would be somewhere towards the east end, having that tank. I don't see right now or anywhere or have seen any sort of plan proposed that allows any new connections whether that be commercial, whether that be residential. And so the general question underlying this is how do the taxpayers get their return on investment?
You want to?
Thanks, Stephen. I think so. Part of our conversation, firstly, circle back to your point, I think the return on investment is going to have to be eventual. The report and the engineering study that we commissioned has specifically to do with the deficiencies right now, not with the growth. They have to do with fire flow. So that's what we're trying to address first. The board discussed whether or not to include option 2, but considering it requires procuring land, which we do not have on the east end of the loop, decided to wait, and that will be something that I think we investigate with once we have the utility up and running. That's been the plan, and that's what we've discussed. I agree. I would love for us to plan for growth. We currently do not have, or Craig from MSK Engineers has said he's able to give us, once we own the company, to have that hydraulic modeling done for us so we know what's required for those connections. But right now we do not know what's required. It could be maybe in a world where we address the deficiencies, we add some pressure back and can add connections, but because we're also adding pressure to the system, an old system, that also might come with its own issues. We don't know what we don't know. I agree, we need to prioritize growth. It's one of the reasons that I've advocated for buying the water company, and this board knows the needs that we need to do it. It's one step of many we plan to take and need to take. It's just not included in this bond.
Okay. Quick follow-up question. Do you guys have an idea, or have you discussed a timeline of when you, or as a town, we want to get to that point where we're doing these things, adding a new connection, having a plan for that return? Or is it just
adding the tank, you mean? Specifically, the
tank would further help.
Right, the tank doesn't explicitly add connections.
No, but the likely somewhere between 10, 15, $20 million for the replacement in the village itself. And that's another reminder, is that none of what is bonded right now does anything to the infrastructure in the village. Outside of, it stops at the rec center. So that's just another thing. One, for the breakdown, I think, which is going to continue to happen. But two, it sounds like a second phase, hopefully not 3 to 5 years, and hopefully within the next 1 to 2 years of really focusing on where the return on the investment is.
Yeah, we're moving at a pace that that our finances allow for, which is, not as fast as any of us would like, but also within the limitations of our staff and our abilities. And I realize that that is too fast for some of our constituents and not fast enough for some others.
Thank you all.
Online?
No online.
Go ahead.
Hi, Deborah Newhoff, Woodstock town resident. I've been up here before talking on another issue. And the reason I'm here is that it was brought to my attention by neighbors of mine that live in the town. And we've only owned a house in the town for not even 5 years yet. And in doing so, have found water, fortunately for us, is not an issue right now, but having the well looked at, having to put in a drain pipe to make sure that the water doesn't flood the basement, et cetera, different expenses that come in owning a house in the town. Have no qualms with what we're proposing here in many ways, until I found out that there's a possibility that town residents would need to pay possibly 40% for this whole project. And that's something that, since it's my daughters and I that own the house, work very hard to try to keep everything up, are finding more and more expenses to live here. So I have something that I'm going to read that my neighbors and I have put together. It's very brief. But just curious, how did you come up with a 40-60 split between non-users and users? If this is agreed, if this is what it is, and agree that municipal buildings, nonprofits, and hydrants should be paid for by all. But according to the WWWG, these entities make up only 7% of the properties using the water system. How do you explain the discrepancy? And where in Vermont is there a precedent for non-users paying for water systems that they will never be able to use? I think that non-users should contribute only 7% to running them and maintaining, and that this should be paid for by a flat per property fee that is not based on property value.
I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to address where that split came from. So we've had several meetings about this. And like I said, the allocation is tentative, and that's why we're having this meeting to receive feedback. But the idea was that because all taxpayers are currently paying hydrant fees, and because the Vondell would be viewed as a town asset that all taxpayers would reap the benefits of, that those would be carried by all taxpayers, users and non-users, and that the projects for the Elm Street suspension and the new well would be carried by users only. So users will be paying the full $8.8 million. Non-users would be paying $6.6 million. And I want to clarify, within the water working group study that Deborah referenced, we do have a unique situation in Woodstock that was highlighted in the water working group study, where all taxpayers pay for the hydrants. And that's why we felt comfortable coming to this allocation. The water working group, advised that putting all of this on the users itself would put strain on low and moderate income households. We all know that the water rates themselves need to change and need to increase, and that's something that will also happen in addition to these bonds. And so that's how we got there. Again, if you have a suggestion, 7%, is there a way you came to 7%?
Have to confer with the group.
Okay.
What we were thinking when across the board. Oh, in a brief discussion, that across the board, it shouldn't matter how much somebody's value of their home is, whether it's a 300,000 or an 800,000 or a 1 point whatever, that we all that are that are town residents, we could pay a flat rate because we're using, it's not that we don't use the water in town and everything,
Right.
but why should we have to pay that much more?
You're saying, okay. So I think what two important distinctions to make is that bond between users and non-users, we're splitting the bond between all taxpayers and users. So everything that the users are paying, or everything that everything the users are paying for, how do I want to say? Everything the non-users are paying for is also being paid for by users. The second thing I want to bring up is that right now, that's how we structure all bond payments, are by assessed value. They're not flat fees. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're built into our property taxes based on our assessed values. So right now, everybody's paying off the emergency services building. Everybody is paying that according to their assessed value on their home. I think we have a question online, Ray.
Online? I don't see any.
Oh, I thought Alex raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that because the distinction is the water from the hydrant.
Let's hear Peter first. We want to get everyone a first chance to speak. No, we'll give everyone a first
Want
chance.
to follow? I'm good, but yeah. So Peter Shoemaker, Woodstock, I'll answer your question briefly, your friends. So 7% of the schools, town buildings, there's 7% of like the hookups in town, and they use 13% of the water. So you already do pay for that in your taxes because the town obviously gets charged the school and your school taxes So you're already paying for their use of water. So there's no need to add anything else. You're already paying for that. Same thing with the hydrants. You're already paying for that in your taxes. That's already done. I want to piggyback a little bit because that seems to be the word tonight on a couple of people talked about revenue, where we're going to get revenue from in future. So right now, have you guys, you're still at that same budget, about 628,000
We haven't discussed it in a few weeks.
since that time, but you're 628. And I see now the bond, you're looking at doing a 5 million instead of the 4. It's gone up to 5 million now that you're looking at on. That's a new item too, right?
So what we're doing is the engineering report was done last year. As we know, inflation has increased. So
Yeah, oh, yeah.
5 million
yeah.
was a safe estimate. We talked with our engineers to kind of make sure we were having a safe number for the bond. So we don't want to come back and bond for more later.
So I think I was here the night that the distribution occurred. It was kind of a free-flowing, very limited free-flowing discussion where it was like, okay, I think we're going to take the tanks and we'll put that with, and that's going to be the second part. That's not being done now. That we'll put that with the rate users, and then we're going to put the most needed ones with the rate users, Elm Street and the pipe there. And then we'll go ahead and do Vondell separate, which I've stated in the past. I think that's a town issue. That's not a water issue. If you want to vote for it for recreational use, feel free to, but let's be honest, unless they're going to drop a helicopter and scoop up some water, once you do that, it's not going to be a backup water source, but that's fine. We can make sure that's always there. And I said, I'm for that. I think it's a great value. It's a great recreation. I said that. So have you done any revenue projections about how you talked about setting rates and raising rates. It's in many reports, all the reports, it is historically low rates. And we all know that the rates, and everyone in the village knows here, your rates haven't increased in almost a decade now. So, right? I mean, that's an agreed upon fact. Not that I've heard.
I haven't, they're still in front of the PUC.
Right, yeah, I haven't got, yeah. Your usage, if you've gone over the base usage, you use more gallons, then you're gonna pay more. So what I'd like to know is, if you haven't generated revenue and figured out how much revenue that this new system that you've talked about has to increase the rates, how do we know how to divvy up bond payments when you could actually maybe look at the rates and say, if we increase the rates 25%, and I base that on a figure, if you haven't raised anything in 10 years or 9 years, actually, at 2.5% a year, you're going to get to a 25% increase. Historically low water rates. Average rate in Woodstock is $3.33 for a water bill. So if it goes up 25%, you're only going to go up. Well, make it easy. We'll say if you pay a $400 water bill and you do a 25% increase, your water bill is now $500. That's what we're talking about, an increase. If we increase the revenue generated by the water department, which we will refer to it as now, if you look at that and say, this is what we need to do repairs, and you're now going to use $135,000 from the Economic Development Committee, the 2-1% option, the 2-1%, which I don't think should be used for Vondell, because I don't think that's in capital improvement. That is, it's a, like we said, it's a fun thing to have, and it'll be good for tourism and for people's mind to be out in the woods. But if you're going to split this up before the December vote and not know what the revenue is going to be generated by the new water department, how can you then divvy up costs? If you could say like, well, if we increase it 25%, will that allow us to cover all the debt service and this very robust budget of 628, which is higher than the previous water department was being run at? Can you explain to us? Because what I think is happening, if you look at this, is that, to go to your point, 6% of the users use 33% of the water, and that's the hospitality. And that was decided that the Woodstock Inn is the largest user of that. So what you're doing, and we're taking money that could be generated by people visiting and paying higher tariffs to stay at our hospitalities, which is not going to, it's going to be less than the 1% options tax that they're absorbing, which did not affect their business at all, if I speak it to people. So until you look at revenue and say, because I would say, I propose A 25% increase would be a less burden on the users than taxing them on their property values. Because what you're doing, yep,
Answer
Yeah.
your questions.
sure, okay, yeah, I mean, my question is, if you haven't done the right, so if you were doing projected revenue with a 25% increase, and the Vondell property was purchased in the 60s, and that was done when the drought was happening, and it was a 40% increase that they implemented that year, the Woodstock Aqueduct Company. So a 40% increase because they knew they had an issue. So it's not unheard of in times of dire thing that the rates go up. And we're not talking about higher rates in Woodstock. If anyone can look at me in the thing and say that you pay high water rates in Woodstock, you better prove that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
finish up.
So what I'm saying is that if you are not willing to look at how much funding is going to come from a water department, how can we divide up what the bond payments would be? Because the way you're doing it now,
Okay.
you're gonna let the Woodstock in, you're gonna let the Woodstock in off the hook for water usage. They're not going, their water rates are not gonna go up as much as but they're gonna pay less property taxes than they will for a water increase. Only 49% of the usage of the Woodstock is done by residential users. So you'll be your plan, it'll be subsidizing the Woodstock Inn and other hospitality departments. Until you figure out the numbers and put the numbers out to us, I would suggest that splitting the bond up can't be done because you don't know how much revenue is going to come from the water department. Thank you for your time. Sorry.
Next. Susie, can you, what you said?
Yeah, let us, or
Yeah.
does anybody on the board want to address, or Eric?
To be honest, I'm not sure what the question was to address. What I'll say is,
No, I think, I think one thing is that we are exploring different rates, and we're asking the Finance Committee and the Water Working Committee to explore that and come back to us. So that part of your question is, certainly in process.
yeah, and I think a few weeks ago, the select board did meet and went over our potential water budgets. We looked at what the revenue could be based on what we thought the budget would be needed to run the water department, along with saving for capital reserves, along with having enough money to do maintenance on the equipment throughout the year. And I believe the select board substantially increased the budget from what the aqueduct currently has.
And that was a public meeting, so you
I
should.
was here for that, yes, I was here, and that's why I came up with the figure. Still, if you were to charge a 25% water tariff increase in the water tariff usage, it actually is cheaper for the users that are residential users in town to pay it that way. And unless someone can prove me wrong on that, and I may be wrong, that is foolish because that. Partly when you say we're going to split it up bond and non-users, and you haven't talked about a rate increase. So even if you have a rate increase of a user in town of your taxes going up, now they're going to also increase your rates too. So instead of just increasing your rates 25%, which would be cheaper than paying $36 on $100,000, right? So if you have a $500,000 house, you're going to pay $180 a year in increased property taxes. If you have a $400 water bill and it goes up 25%, you're only going to pay $100 more a year to get the same thing done. So you're actually going to pay $80 more to get the same thing done because you're subsidizing the hospitality interest that uses most of the water. So I think you need to address that.
And what I said is that we are, that the water committee, that we are looking into that. So I don't know how.
I didn't see with those meetings. I haven't seen the meetings, or those are meetings that anyone could attend. Are those private meetings? They haven't been warned. I'm not sure.
All our meetings are public.
So the Woodstock,
Finance.
That's happening this coming Tuesday.
right? So that has okay. So when that'll be on the listserv because it seems to be the.
Yes. So the select board meets every third Tuesday. So it's a regular scheduled meeting. It's on our website. It's posted on listserv, etc.
So this will be your first time discussing revenue then.
No, we've talked about revenue. You were at the meeting, we talked about revenue.
You talked about, I don't remember, but you talked about the budget part of it. I don't remember
That-
anything about saying.
Yes, so when you do a utility department committee, the budget creates the revenue. You cannot raise more revenue than what your expenses are, right? So as we talked about the budget and create the expenses, that's how you then find out how much revenue you need to raise for that year. So we did talk about revenue as we went through that process.
Right, so but I guess you never said like, okay, if we increase what present, the Woodstock Aqueduct collected in revenues in 2022, and we increase that by 25%, will that cover our projected budget?
We did, and the answer was no.
But
We did, and the answer was no. I think that we have decided that the aqueduct has not run the company well financially, and we need to have more expenses to run the company. So we need to have money for capital projects, which they.
the revenue, how much revenue did they generate in 2022? Or I don't know, the 23 is even finalized yet. I don't know how it runs, but say the last 22, say in 22, what their revenue was, not their expenses, their revenue. And if you were to increase that revenue by 25%, there were 20, and it could be, we talked about eliminating, worried about the low income and tough affordable housing. Well, we talked about one of the things you could do is you could have a water district, a water department that calculates nonprofits such as Twin Pines. They would pay less water. Their water rates would be lower.
All right,
Trying to have a debate here, but you can.
Well, we were trying to, we actually extended from 2 to 5 minutes.
I'm not going to debate anything that I just heard. Okay, I'm just saying that,
let's get Alex first.
no, I'm just saying that
We gotta go in order. I'm trying to keep things in line. Okay, no, I know, but
Alex, are you there? She's not on camera. I'm not sure if he went away or not.
No, he's up in the corner.
yeah, but he's not.
He's not in.
Oh, okay.
All right, so,
No, all I wanted to do was say
You have to come up.
all right,
So I have some more questions based on that, because it was my
Could you just
understanding,
introduce
Susie Stoll's Woodstock Village. It was my understanding that users are getting their rates raised because we're going to be paying for the Elm Street Bridge, right? So we're paying for water and we're also paying for the Elm Street Bridge. And I don't see how the math works out that it's going to be cheaper for us to just pay more, rather than, because I think what he's suggesting is that rather than, we pay on a bond, users just pay more, but the bond is spread out to everybody. And, but only the users would be paying for the, so I don't really see how, it would be a lot more than 25% because you're only going to be charging users for the 1B bond, right? And so we're paying for the Elm Street, we're paying for that, but the 1B bond ultimately benefits everybody. So I don't see how the math works out.
Susie, I just want to clarify. We're saying that we all know that user rates need to increase, not to address, the state of the infrastructure, but also to run the utility properly, as Eric said, which hasn't really been done. So it's going to require higher rates
That's
from
always
users.
been my understanding from the get-go. So I don't understand where this we've not considered raising rates argument comes from.
No, we understand the value of developing a rate card, a new rate card, which would break down, and I think we've tasked the finance committee, and we're going to meet with them on Tuesday about developing a rate card that maybe breaks out different uses, and maybe that they come back with different options for us to explore what that rate card looks like based on the data we have on usage, but also based on, what's standard for other utility companies, and also based on what our goals are for the future. If we are trying to increase housing, if we want to incentivize conservation of water, things like that.
My name's Charlie Kimball, Woodstock resident. I've spoken enough about this in the past, so I don't feel like I need to much more, but just a couple of points about, one is the grand list growth. Stephen Ballard was right in that the study was only addressing the capacity of the system to rectify the lack of pressure at the fire hydrants. However, what we don't know is when 1B is completed and that water pressure is increased, that doesn't mean that you can't open up new development because of it. And that's not only water pressure, but that's also capacity of the wells. Remember that the system is losing about 31% of the water that's going through, at least it's unbilled. So there's an opportunity to save that water, identify where it is to supply those new potential developments. The second is that we don't really know what it's going to cost us yet. And it's a terrible thing not to say we don't really know yet because of the existence of grants that are available. So there was a recent improvement, I think in Enfield or Canaan, New Hampshire, where they received congressionally directed spending of over $1.5 million towards their water system. So we could look at a significantly lower cost of our water system than what you've actually projected here. Another thing is the water rates. Glad to hear that the water rate is going to be addressed because it's a very complex system or complex issue of figuring out who pays based on your consumption, based on the fact you have a connection, the size of your connection. So I'm glad you're taking a good look at that. So just wanted to get those points out that there is really an opportunity to increase capacity, to increase the grand list, and that we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be yet because we don't know the grants that you might get. Thank you. And with that, I have a date.
I just have some very simple questions because at this point I'm becoming somewhat confused. It's my understanding that the entire town has to vote on any bond we issue. Is that correct? Okay. It's also my understanding that any allocation of how that bond gets repaid between users and taxpayers throughout the town, that if it goes to users, that will be part of the rate. The rate will be increased to the extent that the users need to pay, whether it's 40% or 20%. I don't want to get into those percentages because I have no idea what's fair. But I just want to be clear that if we take out a bond to buy Vondell and it's decided that that entire bond is paid for by the taxpayers as opposed to the users, then every taxpayer, every homeowner will be assessed a certain amount based on their assessed value. Is that also correct? Okay. If any time, so with the next phase, which is 1B, which is going to be essentially addressing the hydrant issue or the pressure issue, which hopefully might allow us to connect some additional people as well. That's the hope. That is going to be split between the repayment of that bond is going to be split between the users and all taxpayers, which of course includes the users. Is that correct as well? Okay.
Yes, I want to clarify. So Vondell, the way that Eric currently had it set up was that the Vondell and option 1B would be paid for by all users or all taxpayers. Sorry.
Okay.
And that only users would carry the debt burden for the Elm Street suspension and the new well.
Okay, so the subsequent capacity improvements. Okay, all right. All right, thank you, because I was just getting kind of confused about, and I just do want to make the case that users are also taxpayers.
Yes.
So users, as they should, are paying both the same tax as everybody else in the town, and they're also paying their proportion of that wherever those percentages fall.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm just going to make one more point, and that I think it's quite reasonable that users pay more. That is obviously a very reasonable situation, but all taxpayers in the town of Woodstock benefit from having a functioning municipal core. And that municipal core goes away without functioning water. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Chris Miller. I admit to being a user. I want to go back to the Vondell Reservoir for a second. I'm hearing a lot of maybes and could be's and ifs. I want to clarify some things about its usefulness to the water system. As I understand it, the Woodstock Aqueduct water system, what comes out of the hydrants is the same as what comes out of our taps. If we hooked up the Vondell Reservoir to that system, it would not only go through the hydrants, it would also come out of our taps. The only way to hook that up to our system is to put purification, decontamination system on that water. Have you put a price tag on?
No,
And-
I mean, our point is, this is something, I don't want somebody in 20 years to look back and say, oh my God, the wells out on Route 12 aren't functioning anymore, and the town could have bought Vondell and didn't.
I understand,
So
but
no, we-
if there are alternatives,
It can also change in 20.
if there are alternatives to using that Vondell water that are cheaper than building the purification plant, we should know that now. I think you should be careful about promising the use of that water to hook up to the system, because I'm not sure that it's feasible.
Inside Woodstock. Can you just say how much will the $1.6 million cost each homeowner based on, the
Well, so this is where it gets a little in the weeds and the math. We can do it without including any of the 1% tax. I can give you that number. That is probably the easiest way I can do it.
Sure.
That works. Okay.
And
Yeah.
without potential grants and
Yeah.
donations as well.
Thank you. Give me 1 second. I'm going to change the interests. Actually, I think I have it here. So this is an estimate, based off very quick math. But something either, about $12.71 per $100,000, appraisal on your house. So for someone with, appraisal of $550,000, it'll be about $70 the first year. And each year it goes down as the interest goes down as well.
okay. And has there been any research as to whether the Vermont Land Trust or some other responsible entity might purchase the reservoir?
Yeah.
And we'd still get the easement?
That discussions are in process.
Thank you.
Somebody has their hand up, I believe.
April.
Yeah, this is Ben Pauley, Woodstock resident. I just wanted to kind of reiterate the importance of the timeline of determining when new hookups can be made. And I know there's a lot of puzzle pieces and unknowns. And I think personally been part of a lot of conversations about people wanting to develop or wanting to build projects. And, most of them end with, without water, they can't go forward. So I would definitely put myself into that group, Laura, of people who, want the date of when hookups can be added, sooner rather than later. And I think just for, future housing and development, knowing when that happens is extremely important. So I don't have much of an opinion on the Vondell property, but I wouldn't want investing in that property affect the ability to invest in other property that would have more of a direct impact on adding capacity or future development needs than the Vondell property. So that's just my comments. Thanks.
Any other?
Jill Mitchell, South Woodstock resident. I came here this evening because non-user and allocation seems like a pretty solid oxymoron to me that I was trying to work through in my head. And listening to some of you tonight, I've gotten to grasp some of it, but I'm not sure I've grasped the 40% of it. And I'm curious if you can further speak to the non-user benefits that have been referenced.
Sure. Do you want to speak as a non-user system? Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, why we're having this meeting is to hear feedback, but I think that the way I view it is that, given the benefits of having a municipal water system and having fire protection, which is a public good, that there are no technical non-users of the system. We're all currently paying into the water utility. We're all currently paying into the aqueduct, both people who have the tap water and then people who have private wells. I think personally for me, I see the fire protection being incredibly important, not in the sense of like, well, everybody can use the fire protection, but that it's an important part of protecting our grand list and the value of our grand list. Because without that, we have to, the burden has to be shared by fewer people should we suffer a structure fire or something like that. I think to Charlie's point earlier, maybe he didn't say it in this meeting, we are all reaping the benefits of having a very vibrant downtown. It's how we are bringing in local options tax to help offset some of these infrastructure things. And when that infrastructure has failed, as it has repeatedly, our community has suffered greatly. And so those are the reasons I see. If anybody wants to add more, and if you want to give feedback on that, I'm also open to that.
No, I agree.
I think, and some of the municipal core, fire protection, things like that are things that I'm hearing and learning about. Now, I'm still not sure it's calculating to the amount. I mean, just for putting it on the table for sake of conversation, I have to, in my homeowner's insurance policy, indicate that I have a water source nearby for my own fire protection, right? So I'm not entirely confident that I know that I'll benefit from a fire truck, that's filled with water coming to my house.
Yeah.
Got it. So like that ticks a box, but I'm not sure it ticks the 40% box. Yeah.
Is it a dollar? Is it the percentage, the principle of the percentage that's struggling, or is it a dollar amount that's struggling?
I think it's the percentage
Okay.
that I'm struggling with. And I think, there's implications to my well and to my, my homeowner's insurance policy and things like that, that I have, my family, my homestead has the burden of that is not
Absolutely.
shared,
Yeah.
so I think a 40-60 split is a tough sell for me.
Do you have a sense for you where that would feel better?
I mean, 7 sounds great. But but also taking into account municipal core and things like that. I'm really just learning about what these benefits are. So I'm not comfortable throwing out a number, but I mean, I think a quarter of that in, maybe half of that, but not the full 40%.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it? Well, I think it's what's confusing is like when we talk about users, non-users versus taxpayers and users. Everybody is clear on like, I guess 60-40.
That was in the standard, and
That
I
was in the
don't know
standard.
where they came up with that number.
Yeah, I think that's the number that's sticking.
That's why we're having this meeting.
That's
isn't
why
it?
yeah.
It's 80-20.
80-20. That would hit.
80-20 between all taxpayers
Between
and,
all taxpayers and users, that's my calculation.
right, and all taxpayers includes users.
Okay.
So that's,
right.
it's hard to get to the place
Yeah,
where
and
you're
that's what I mean. I
getting.
haven't sat with the numbers enough to be confident with what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think the numbers that have been discussed here is everyone paying 80, right? So more than what the standard reported. So I think
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
I just don't want people thinking, I'm concerned that the standard wasn't right and that needs to be said.
I'm also concerned that non-users aren't getting full messaging either. So that,
Yeah.
that has
And
concern.
that's, yeah, and I think that's why,
Yeah.
we're trying
And
to
that's
have
why, yeah,
meetings.
so I'm here.
I think one of the harder parts of our job is, and any job or anything that we do is trying to put out information that is digestible for folks.
course.
And because we have, running a utility is not, it's not household math. There's complicated things, and there's certain things that like we've gone back and forth about, and adjustments that need and want to make. But we want to make sure that everybody understands when they vote on December 10th, what information, that they have the right information.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think the title non-user has a kind of default definition that there's little implication, I'm on the hill, doesn't necessarily affect me. And I think that messaging could be a little clearer. So appreciate taking the time to do that.
I think I'll speak further on that. I think that there's an overwhelming sense that we as residents are more independent than we actually are.
Mhm.
And we rely on many things and many services that a lot of us don't pay for. And I understand on face value how people who don't receive tap water paying for a utility, for the use of a utility, or when not even having access to the utility seems beyond the pale. I also know that, the more we put this on users, the more financial burden we are asking from them, and then thus are limited in what we can operate the utility on in reasonable expectations. To Peter's point, he's saying that rates haven't been raised in a while.
Yep.
So it's reasonable to expect that. I would never come to the taxpayers of this town and say, well, you've been underpaying your taxes, so we're going to jack them up 25% because we've been underpaying. I don't think that's a winning argument, even if it's true. And so I think that there needs to be a large acknowledgement of, when we all succeed, everybody succeeds. When parts of our town succeed, we all succeed. But I hear you on the math and clearing up those communications. I think we could do better on that.
And I mean, even tonight, Eric, if you can clarify, I heard $36 on 100,000 and $12.71 on 100,000. I wrote down both, and I'm not sure I know just for what.
12 would be for the Vondell, $12 per year per $100,000.
And is that a user, non-user?
That would be for everybody,
Everybody.
all taxpayers.
Okay.
And a part of that, 12 would be a part of that 36 if we're including, 36 is the total of, of the Vondell plus option.
Okay.
Yeah, so just those numbers came from a meeting about a month ago where the select board talked about an allocation using the local option tax, offset some of the costs, and then having 1B and Vondell paid by all parcels.
Okay.
In that scenario, it would be $36.52 per $1,000 appraisal on your house.
Okay.
If things change, if all you parcels just paying the Vondell, then it was a $12 something mentioned earlier. So that was just that one example the select board talked about last month.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, even as, I don't remember who suggested it, but even sharing some of the budgetary breakdowns so that, we can look at numbers would be super helpful. I love to play in a good spreadsheet. So.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's back.
Back, or is that before?
He was back, but
Alex,
There
are
he
you
is.
back? There he is.
I'm back. Yeah, on the same note of spreadsheets, rates haven't increased since 2013. So well and the Elm bond going to users, that equates to a 1.5% annual increase. That compares to like 4% utility compound increases nationally. That's maybe not a great benchmark, but like what we are talking about here is like a pretty significant real decrease in rates. And you know, it's tough to introduce the level of like taxpayer subsidization when the rates appear, at least I know the rate card is going to be reviewed, but at least it seems like there's a real contraction in rates. So there's just a point on the spreadsheet point just raised.
Thank you. Else? Fine.
Before you all go, we have meetings tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, so
No,
tomorrow's Soulful Good Cafe, yeah.
we good at 9.
Yeah, so just with the holiday and some places closing and other commitments, we'll be at Soulfully Good tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to talk about this further.
I'm doing the informal walk at Vondell Saturday at 1.
Monday we'll be at South Woodstock Country Store, Tuesday Avocadabra, Wednesday Montverde, and then Friday Soulfully Good as well. And we'll do some happy hours at night as well, and maybe some things in South Woodstock and Taftsville again.
So please come.
Yeah.
We'll talk more.
Non-working hours.
Yeah, so we're gonna try to let's schedule some things at night. We did that Ottaquiche, Ransom Tavern.
Yeah.
The Woodstock Inn as well. So we'll do those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
For a second? Second. All in favor?